It was 3:07 a.m. when the first knock came, sharp, deliberate, like the sound of a hammer hitting wood. Ethan Turner woke instantly. He wasn't the type to spook easily. He'd done 2 tours overseas and lived through worse than sleepless nights in suburbia. But something about that sound froze him in place. It wasn't the neighbor's kid playing a prank or a raccoon scurrying across the porch. This was a commanding knock, the kind that expected obedience. His wife, Maria, stood beside him, whispering, "What was that?" He didn't answer right away. The second knock came harder, faster, rattling the picture frames on the wall. Ethan swung his legs over the bed, his pulse thudding in his ears. The digital clock glowed red in the darkness. 3:09 a.m., "Stay here," he said quietly, grabbing the flashlight from the nightstand as he crept toward the hallway. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the thermostat. Every step Ethan took on the hardwood floor seemed to echo louder than it should. He passed his son Jack's room, door cracked open, soft glow of a nightlight flickering inside. Jack was a light sleeper. Ethan saw movement under the blanket and knew he was awake too. "It's okay, bud," he whispered. But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. The knocking came again, now accompanied by a low, muffled voice. Ethan moved toward the front door and peered through the peephole. His stomach tightened. A man stood on the porch wearing a black tactical vest labeled HOA Enforcement, the letters stenciled crudely, like something printed from an office supply store. He wore a cap with a small badge glinting under the porch light. "Homeowners Association Compliance Check," the man said, voice flat and official sounding. "We've had reports of unauthorized exterior modifications. You need to come outside immediately." Ethan blinked. He thought he must have misheard. A compliance check. At 3 a.m.? He tightened his grip on the flashlight. "Sir," he called through the door, "this isn't normal procedure. You can come back during daylight. We'll talk to the board." The man didn't flinch. "Failure to comply is a violation of Section 12-3, he replied, stepping closer. "Open the door, or we'll have to conduct the inspection ourselves." His tone had the cold precision of someone used to getting his way. Behind Ethan, Maria appeared in her robe, her face pale in the dim light. "Who is it?" she whispered. "He says he's from the HOA, Ethan said, eyes still locked on the figure outside. "At this hour?" "That's insane," she whispered back. "Something's not right." Ethan nodded slowly. "Go to Jack's room. Lock the door. Call 911 if he tries anything." Then came the sound Ethan dreaded most, a metallic click. The man outside drew something from his belt. Ethan couldn't see clearly through the peephole, but it wasn't a clipboard. He turned off the hall light and motioned for Maria to hurry. She vanished down the hall, bare feet silent against the wood. Ethan's mind raced. His gun was in the biometric safe beside the bed, too far away to reach in time if this escalated. He positioned himself behind the entryway table, heart hammering. The next moment shattered the quiet. With a single violent kick, the doorframe cracked. The lock splintered. The door swung inward, smashing against the wall with a deafening bang. Ethan stumbled back as the figure stepped inside, flashlight beam slicing through the dark. "Step aside," the man barked, fake badge gleaming. "HOA Enforcement. You're in violation." That was when Jack's door opened. The boy's silhouette appeared at the end of the hallway, eyes wide and fixed on the intruder. He wasn't crying, just watching, frozen in a strange calm focus that sent a chill through Ethan. The intruder's beam caught Jack for a moment, and something in his posture changed. Panic, realization that this wasn't going as planned. "Jack!" Ethan shouted. But before the intruder could move farther, Ethan lunged forward, trying to shove him back toward the door. The man swung wildly, striking Ethan in the shoulder with a flashlight. The impact sent him stumbling into the coat rack. The metal clatter echoed down the hall, and Jack disappeared from sight. The fake officer leveled his weapon. Ethan could see now it wasn't standard issue, not police grade. "You just made this harder on yourself," the man hissed. He took another step forward, boots grinding against shattered glass. In that split second, Ethan saw movement again, a faint shift of light from the hallway. Jack was there, just beyond the corner, crouched low. Ethan opened his mouth to warn him, but the words caught in his throat. The man turned slightly, distracted by the sound of Maria yelling something from behind the bedroom door. That hesitation was all it took for Jack to react. The story of that moment would be told later by witnesses, police, and lawyers, each in their own way. But in the still, heart-pounding reality of that night, it happened faster than thought. A sharp, echoing crack split the air, and everything stopped. The motion, the shouting, even the noise of the wind outside. Ethan froze where he stood, disoriented by the ringing in his ears. The fake officer staggered back, clutching his shoulder, dropping his flashlight to the floor. Its beam spun wildly, painting streaks of light across the walls before settling on the family portrait hanging by the stairs. Ethan, Maria, and Jack smiling in the summer sun, a memory that now felt like it belonged to another lifetime. The man collapsed near the door, groaning. Ethan dropped to his knees beside him, half in shock, half in disbelief. In the distance, sirens began to wail, faint at first, then growing louder. Maria rushed to Jack, wrapping her arms around him as he trembled, whispering over and over, "It's okay. You're safe now." But Ethan knew the truth. Nothing about this was okay anymore. The seconds after the gunshot were a blur of light and noise, yet in Ethan's memory, they stretched endlessly. The smell of gunpowder hung thick in the air, sharp and metallic, mixing with the scent of splintered wood and cold night air pouring in through the broken doorway. The intruder lay slumped near the threshold, groaning in pain, one hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder, the other groping for a dropped flashlight. The silence that followed felt unnatural, too still, too hollow. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. He looked toward the hallway, half expecting to see Jack hiding, terrified, but instead the boy stood frozen beside Maria, the gun still in his shaking hands. His eyes were wide, glassy, unfocused. Ethan's instinct screamed at him to move, to do something, but his body lagged behind his thoughts. When he finally reached Jack, he gently pried the weapon from his grip and placed it on the kitchen counter, far from everyone. "It's okay," Ethan said softly, his voice cracking as he knelt beside his son. "It's over. You're safe." But Jack didn't respond. He was staring past his father at the man on the floor, his chest rising and falling too fast, his young mind trying to process what he'd just done. Maria was trembling, her robe pulled tight around her as she grabbed the phone from the hallway table. Her fingers shook so much she nearly dropped it. "I'm calling 911, she said, though her voice was barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded but didn't move from where he knelt beside the intruder. Training from years ago kicked in, his soldier's instinct taking over where panic threatened to consume him. He pressed a towel against the man's wound, keeping pressure steady. "Stay down," he ordered, his tone low and controlled. "Don't move. Help's coming." The man tried to speak, coughing as blood flecked his lips. "Didn't mean to," he muttered weakly, eyes darting around the room. Ethan could see the truth now. Up close, the man looked nothing like law enforcement. The HOA enforcement vest was cheap, stitched onto a tactical jacket that had seen better days. His badge was a toy store knockoff, the kind used in Halloween costumes. But the weapon he carried was real, an unregistered .38 revolver, tucked in a nylon holster. As Maria gave the dispatcher their address, Ethan scanned the man's gear. No ID, no body cam, no radio, just a single folded paper in his pocket, crumpled and stained with sweat. Ethan pulled it out, smoothing it under the beam of the dropped flashlight. It was a printed HOA violation notice, accusing the Turners of unauthorized modifications and unpaid dues totaling over $2,000. But at the bottom, the signature wasn't from the board treasurer or any known member. It was from Linda Marsh, the HOA president herself. Ethan's blood ran cold. She'd been harassing them for months about repainting their shutters, about the garden fence being 2 inches too high. But this was beyond harassment. This was orchestrated intimidation. As realization sank in, distant sirens began to wail, drawing closer, their rhythm quickening as they turned into the cul-de-sac. Red and blue lights reflected off the living room windows, splashing the walls in color. Ethan stood slowly, raising his hands in plain view as the police shouted commands from outside. The front door swung wider as 2 officers entered, guns drawn, eyes darting between Ethan, the bleeding intruder, and the terrified family behind him. "Hands where we can see them," one barked. Ethan complied, stepping aside. "He broke in," Ethan said, voice steady but strained. "Claimed he was HOA enforcement. My son, he he fired in self-defense. The words felt heavy in his mouth. The younger officer rushed to secure the intruder, calling for paramedics over the radio. The older one approached Jack slowly, lowering his tone. "Hey there, son," he said gently. "Can you tell me your name?" Jack didn't answer at first. His breathing was shallow, his gaze distant. Maria held him tightly, whispering to him, rocking slightly as if trying to bring him back to the moment. The officer nodded at Ethan. "We'll take care of this. Sit tight, sir." Outside, neighbors had started to gather, drawn by the flashing lights and the noise. Phones glowed in the darkness as whispers spread. Someone broke in. The HOA guy got shot. Minutes blurred into an hour. The paramedics took the wounded intruder away, sirens fading into the night. Detectives arrived, photographing the scene, bagging evidence, measuring the distance from the door to where the shot had been fired. Ethan gave his statement twice, answering every question with quiet precision. Each time he replayed the moment in his head, the flash, the noise, the look on Jack's face afterward. He couldn't decide whether to feel grateful or horrified. Grateful that his family was alive. Horrified that it came to this. When one of the detectives, a tall woman with tired eyes, finished taking notes, she crouched near the doorway, studying the splintered wood and the fake badge lying beside it. "You're lucky your cameras caught this," she said, glancing up at Ethan. "We'll need the footage, but it looks like a clean self-defense case. Whoever this guy was, he wasn't police. And HOA enforcement isn't a thing." Ethan gave a dry, humorless laugh. "Try telling that to Linda Marsh," he said quietly. By dawn, the house was quiet again, though it no longer felt like home. The air was heavy with the ghosts of what had happened. Maria brewed coffee just to have something to do with her hands, while Jack sat wrapped in a blanket, staring out the window at the flashing tape that marked their lawn as a crime scene. Ethan watched his son, his heart aching. "You did what you had to," he said gently. Jack didn't look away from the window. "He kicked the door in," the boy said, his voice small but certain. "He said we were in violation." Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. "You protected your mom. You protected us all." The words were true, but they didn't feel right. No father ever wanted to see his child bear that kind of weight. As the first rays of morning sunlight cut across the living room, Ethan caught sight of the bullet hole in the wall, small and dark, a scar that would never quite fade, like the memory of that night. For the rest of the day, Ethan fielded phone calls from police, reporters, and eventually a nervous voice claiming to be from the HOA board. They expressed shock and sympathy, but none of it sounded genuine. When Ethan mentioned Linda's signature on the violation paper, there was a long pause, followed by a rushed promise to investigate internally. He knew what that meant: damage control. They'd try to distance themselves, to bury the truth. But not this time. He had evidence, witnesses, and a 12-year-old boy who'd just proven more courage than the entire board combined. Ethan made a quiet vow to himself: this wasn't over. Someone had sent that man to their door. Someone had decided fear was an acceptable form of governance. And before this was done, whoever it was would face real justice. That night, as the neighborhood settled back into uneasy silence, Ethan checked on Jack one last time. The boy was asleep, his face peaceful for the first time in hours. Ethan closed the door softly, his mind already racing with what tomorrow would bring: police interviews, lawyers, media attention. But under all of it, a single thought pulsed steady and cold: the HOA crossed a line tonight. And I'm going to make sure they regret it. By the time the sun was up, the Turner home had transformed from a place of quiet suburban normalcy into a fully active crime scene. Yellow tape wrapped around the front porch like a warning ribbon, and the smell of disinfectant hung heavy in the air where blood had been scrubbed from the hardwood floor. Ethan stood outside with a blanket draped over his shoulders, watching uniformed officers move in and out, each carrying evidence bags filled with pieces of a night that would never leave him. Reporters had begun to gather at the edge of the cul-de-sac, microphones ready, cameras glinting under the pale morning light. A few curious neighbors peeked through their blinds or lingered on lawns, whispering about the shooting, about how the HOA guy got what was coming. Ethan ignored them. He wasn't thinking about gossip. He was thinking about the forged badge, the falsified violation notice, and the name scrawled at the bottom in looping ink: Linda Marsh. Detective Carla Hensley arrived just before noon, her black sedan pulling up quietly to the curb. She was tall, calm, and carried herself with the weary authority of someone who'd seen too many suburban horrors masquerading as neighborhood disputes. "Mr. Turner," she greeted, flashing her badge. "We've identified your intruder." Ethan's jaw tightened. Who was he? She handed him a manila folder. Inside was a photo of the same man from the night before, his mugshot taken years earlier. Name's Greg Sullivan. Former private security, dishonorably discharged from his firm after a series of harassment complaints. Apparently, he's done odd jobs for several HOAs in the county, none officially, and all off the books. Ethan's eyes flicked up from the photo. So he's not law enforcement. Never was. No, she said. But someone wanted you to think he was. Carla motioned toward the house. We found traces of fake credentials on his laptop, templates for HOA badges, inspection forms, even a phony ordnance citation file. Whoever he was working for paid him to play cop. And that's where things get interesting. Inside, Carla set up her laptop on the Turners' dining table, using evidence photos to walk Ethan through what they'd found. The violation notice he carried wasn't printed from his own device, she explained. It came from the official HOA office printer 2 days ago. There's a digital trail in the system logs. Someone used the president's credentials. Ethan felt his stomach knot. "Linda Marsh," he said quietly. "She's been after us for months. Fines, letters, threats. Said our fence violated aesthetic uniformity standards. We rebuilt it twice, still not good enough. Last week she said she'd make an example out of us." Carla nodded. "We've already subpoenaed their board records. I've dealt with her type before, little kingdoms, big egos. But hiring muscle to intimidate residents? That's crossing into felony territory." She paused, watching Ethan's reaction. "We'll handle this carefully. If she's involved, we'll prove it." Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaustion etched into his face. "Detective, I don't care about fines or rules anymore. That man could have killed my son. I want every single person who sent him here held accountable." 2 days later, the investigation widened. Carla's team executed a search warrant on the HOA office, a small building tucked beside the community clubhouse, usually used for board meetings and storage. What they found sent ripples through the department. Stacks of violation notices, pre-signed by Linda, were piled in filing cabinets, many addressed to homeowners who'd refused to pay arbitrary fees. Several envelopes contained cash payments logged as maintenance donations. And in one locked drawer, they discovered something damning, a check stub made out to Greg Sullivan Security Consulting, dated 1 week before the break-in. Carla took photos, her expression hardening. "There it is," she muttered. "Proof of intent." When Ethan arrived later that afternoon, she showed him everything. "This is organized harassment," she said. "The HOA's been using fear to control compliance. You weren't their first target, but you might be the last." News of the investigation spread fast. By the end of the week, the HOA community chat boards were flooded with rumors. Some residents defended Linda, claiming she was being framed. Others came forward with their own stories, threats of fines, forced compliance inspections, even trespassing incidents. Ethan watched it all unfold quietly, sitting on his porch at dusk with Jack beside him. The boy hadn't spoken much since that night. He stayed close to his parents, eyes wary, sleep restless. Ethan kept his arm around him, staring at the glowing blue light of police cars parked near the clubhouse. "You see that, Jack?" he said softly. "That's what truth looks like when it finally gets noticed." The boy nodded faintly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is she going to jail?" Ethan looked out at the neat row of houses that once felt safe. "She will," he said. "People like her always think rules protect them. But not this time." When the arrest came, it was quiet but devastating. Linda Marsh was led out of her home in handcuffs 3 weeks after the break-in, her once perfect lawn lit by flashing red and blue lights. The neighborhood gathered to watch as the woman who'd ruled their lives through fines and threats was escorted into a police cruiser. Charges included conspiracy, criminal solicitation, and misuse of HOA funds. Later, at the station, she tried to claim ignorance, that Greg Sullivan had acted independently, that she only wanted compliance. But when confronted with the signed checks and internal emails instructing him to remind the Turners who's in charge, she fell silent. Detective Carla later called Ethan personally. "We've got her," she said simply. The DA's moving forward with full charges. Ethan exhaled for the first time in weeks, the tension finally breaking. But relief wasn't victory, not yet. That night, as rain pattered against the windows, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table, the house dim except for the glow of the lamp above him. He opened his laptop and played the door camera footage again, the knock, the shouting, the chaos. It still made his chest tighten, still made him feel helpless. But beneath that fear, something else burned now: purpose. The HOA had operated unchecked for too long, and their arrogance nearly cost him everything. He wasn't going to let them bury it under paperwork and quiet settlements. As thunder rumbled outside, he began drafting a letter, not to the HOA, but to every homeowner in the subdivision. It was time for the truth to spread beyond police reports. No more silence. No more fear. The next chapter wouldn't just be about justice in court, it would be about taking back the community itself. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper, coffee, and rain-soaked carpet, a combination that somehow made the place feel both sacred and exhausted. On the morning of Linda Marsh's trial, every seat in the gallery was filled. Residents of Pinebrook Estates, once a tightly controlled neighborhood of manicured lawns and whispered gossip, now sat shoulder to shoulder, waiting for judgment. News crews lined the steps outside, cameras poised to capture the downfall of the woman who had once ruled them with fines and fear. Ethan sat near the front with Maria and Jack beside him. The boy looked smaller than usual, his shoulders tucked inward, a hood drawn loosely over his head to avoid the flashes of photographers. Ethan kept a steady hand on his son's back, feeling the boy's quiet trembling beneath his palm. "You don't have to be here," Ethan whispered. Jack shook his head. "I want to see her hear the truth," he said softly. There was steel in his voice now, not anger, not vengeance, just quiet resolve. Linda entered flanked by her attorney, dressed in a conservative gray suit that did little to hide the tension in her jaw. Gone was the polished smile she used to wear at board meetings, the one that promised control and compliance. Now, her face was pale, her eyes restless as she scanned the crowd. When her gaze met Ethan's, she froze for a fraction of a second, long enough for the room to feel it. He didn't look away. She was seeing the cost of her arrogance, the consequences of the power she had abused. The judge, an older man with a weary but steady presence, called the room to order. State versus Linda Marsh, case number 11-492. Charges: criminal conspiracy, unlawful solicitation, and misuse of HOA funds. The courtroom murmured, the words heavy with meaning. 4 years, Pinebrook's residents had whispered about corruption, favoritism, the mysterious fees that vanished into thin air. Now, the whispers were being read into the record. Detective Carla Hensley was the prosecution's first witness. Calm, composed, she presented her evidence with surgical precision. "Our investigation found a series of payments from the Pinebrook HOA Maintenance Fund to a private contractor named Greg Sullivan," she explained, clicking through slides of bank statements. These payments had no accompanying work orders or board approval. Further, digital forensics confirmed that the HOA's office computer, logged in under Linda Marsh's credentials, printed a falsified violation notice targeting the Turner family 2 days before the home invasion. She turned slightly toward the jury. That document was found on the suspect during the break-in. The motive was clear: intimidation. The defense attorney objected, muttering about speculation, but the judge overruled him. Carla continued. "We also recovered internal emails in which the defendant instructed Sullivan to, quote, remind them that HOA rules are not optional." End quote. A ripple of murmurs passed through the room. Linda's attorney whispered something to her, but she kept her eyes on the table, jaw tightening. When Ethan took the stand, the room fell silent. He spoke with measured calm, the kind of steadiness that comes from walking through hell and surviving it. He recounted that night in vivid but controlled detail: the pounding on the door, the fake badge, the kick that shattered the frame, the moment Jack fired. His voice wavered only once, when he described holding his son afterward, the smell of gunpowder still lingering in the air. "She thought fear was a tool," he said quietly, eyes locked on Linda. "She used authority like a weapon. And when she couldn't scare us with paper and fines, she sent someone with a gun. Gasps echoed softly across the room. Ethan's testimony wasn't theatrical. It was raw, grounded, undeniable. The prosecutor showed the jury the security footage next, grainy but powerful. The sound of the door being kicked in, the voice shouting, "HOA enforcement!" It played like something from a nightmare, but this one had a date, a time, and a neighborhood attached to it. The defense tried to spin the story, claiming Linda had been misled by Sullivan, that she'd merely authorized a routine compliance check. But every piece of evidence contradicted her. The signed checks, the time-stamped emails, the pre-written notices addressed to other homeowners who had resisted paying maintenance penalties. One by one, her allies on the HOA board were called to testify. Some hesitated, their loyalty wavering under oath, but most cracked quickly. She said she'd handle the Turners herself, one former board member admitted. She told us to stop sending letters, said she had a special contact who could make them cooperate. The prosecutor nodded. And did you know this special contact was a man who had been fired for violent conduct? The witness swallowed hard. Not until after the shooting. The courtroom fell into a heavy, charged silence. When the verdict finally came, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The jury filed in after just 3 hours of deliberation, a short time for a case that had consumed the entire community. The foreman stood, paper trembling slightly in his hands. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Linda Marsh, guilty on all counts." The words hit like a thunderclap. Some residents gasped, others whispered prayers of relief. Ethan closed his eyes, exhaling slowly as Maria gripped his hand. Jack looked up at the woman who had tormented them for months and finally whispered, "It's over." Linda sat motionless, her expression hollow, eyes unfocused as if she were struggling to process the sound of her own downfall. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and final. The court hereby sentences the defendant to 10 years, with eligibility for parole after 6. The echo of the gavel seemed to reverberate through every cul-de-sac and manicured hedge in Pinebrook Estates. Outside, the rain had stopped. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, microphones thrust forward, but Ethan and his family slipped through the crowd quietly. Detective Hensley caught up to them by the parking lot. "You did the right thing, Ethan," she said, offering a small, weary smile. "People like her count on silence. You broke that." Ethan nodded, his voice rough but steady. "This was never about revenge. It was about ending the fear." Carla looked at Jack, who stood beside his father, eyes brighter now. "You're one brave kid," she said softly. "You saved your family." Jack gave a small nod, but he didn't say anything. Some things, Ethan thought, didn't need words. As they drove back home, Pinebrook looked different. The neat rows of houses still stood, the lawn still trimmed, but something invisible had shifted. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact waved hesitantly, almost apologetically. A few even stepped forward, thanking Ethan quietly for standing up when no one else dared. The HOA office remained dark, its windows covered with plywood, a property seized by county sheriff notice taped to the door. For the first time in years, Pinebrook felt free. The tyranny of signatures and bylaws had ended not with a board vote, but with justice served in open court. Ethan parked the car and looked at his family, tired, scarred, but whole. "We're done with this chapter," he said. "Let's start a new one." That night, the Turners sat together on the porch as dusk settled over the neighborhood. The air smelled of wet grass and peace, something they hadn't felt in months. Jack leaned against his father's shoulder, the soft hum of crickets filling the silence. "Dad," he said quietly, "do you think she ever thought she was right?" Ethan considered the question for a long moment before answering. "People like that don't care about being right," he said. "They care about being in control." Jack nodded slowly, then closed his eyes, the tension finally leaving his small frame. Across the street, someone quietly took down the old HOA sign that had hung at the entrance for years. Its metal clatter echoed faintly through the still night, marking the end of an era, and the beginning of something Pinebrook hadn't known in a long time: freedom. The sun rose slowly over Pinebrook Estates, turning the once perfectly manicured lawns gold. For the first time in years, there was no watchful gaze from the HOA office, no clipboard inspections, no threatening envelopes tucked under doormats. Just the sound of sprinklers, morning birds, and the soft rustle of a neighborhood learning how to breathe again. Ethan stood on his porch with a cup of coffee in hand, the steam curling into the crisp air. His reflection shimmered faintly in the front window, a man who had walked through fire and somehow come out whole. Behind him, Jack's laughter drifted through the house, bright and unguarded, as he played with Maria and their dog. It was a sound Ethan hadn't heard in too long. The weeks following the trial had been a strange kind of rebirth. Reporters came and went, trying to capture the scandal that redefined HOA accountability, but for Ethan, it was simpler than that. It was about reclaiming peace. The county had dissolved Pinebrook's HOA entirely. The properties once ruled by bylaws and fines were now managed collectively by the residents. Meetings were held on the grass near the park, under open skies, with folding chairs instead of podiums. People who used to hide behind rules now showed up with lemonade and home-cooked pies. The air buzzed not with fear of violations but with laughter, debate, and sometimes awkward but genuine attempts at forgiveness. One afternoon, as Ethan helped replant the garden bed outside the old HOA office, now repurposed into a community center, Maria wiped her hands on her jeans and said quietly, "You know, I used to be afraid every time a letter came in the mail." Ethan smiled faintly, pressing a trowel into the soil. "Me too. It's strange. Something as small as an envelope could ruin your whole day." She nodded, watching Jack chase after a butterfly near the fence. "Not anymore." For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, the world moving gently around them. A group of teenagers painted a mural on the wall, a sunrise rising over rooftops, the words, "Community over Control," in bold letters beneath it. As evening fell, the neighborhood gathered for what they called the Freedom Picnic. Tables lined the park, strung with lights, the smell of grilled food and fresh-baked bread drifting through the air. For many, it was the first time they had spoken openly in years. People traded stories about the fines that had nearly bankrupted them, the petty violations that had driven wedges between neighbors. But between the laughter and the shared meals, something new took root: connection. Even the old board members, those who had once followed Linda's orders out of fear or greed, showed up quietly, helping set up tables, serving drinks. No one mentioned the past directly, but the act itself, of standing side by side, spoke volumes. Later that night, as lanterns swayed gently in the breeze, Ethan found himself standing by the old oak tree near the park's edge. Detective Carla Hensley approached, dressed casually now, her badge nowhere in sight. "Didn't think I'd see this place so alive," she said, gazing at the crowd. "You'd be surprised what people can rebuild when you take fear out of the equation," Ethan replied. She smiled faintly. "You did more than stand up for yourself, you changed how people think about power. There are a dozen neighborhoods across the state reviewing their HOA structures because of this." Ethan chuckled softly, eyes fixed on the glowing string lights. "I didn't set out to start a movement. I just wanted my family safe." Carla nodded. "That's how most real change starts." She handed him an envelope, a faded copy of the county's final ruling dissolving Pinebrook's HOA. "Figured you'd want the official version," she said. He took it, smiling, then tucked it into his jacket pocket. As the night deepened, Jack climbed onto the small stage set up near the tables. Someone had given him a microphone. His voice trembled at first but steadied quickly. "I just wanted to say, thank you," he began. "To everyone here, for standing up when things got bad. For not giving up on this place. My dad told me that doing the right thing doesn't make you a hero, it just makes you human. But I think, maybe being human is the bravest thing there is." The crowd fell silent for a moment, then erupted into applause. Ethan felt Maria's hand slip into his, her eyes shining in the soft lantern light. When the crowd began to disperse, and laughter faded into the hum of crickets, Ethan walked home under the glow of streetlights. The once perfect neighborhood, now imperfect but alive, stretched quietly before him. He paused at the entrance where the old Pinebrook Estates, a managed community sign had once stood. The metal had been taken down weeks ago, but someone had planted wildflowers there, daisies, violets, and sunflowers swaying gently in the breeze. No name, no rules, just life. Inside the house, Jack was already half asleep on the couch, the dog curled beside him. Ethan draped a blanket over them, lingering a moment to watch the peaceful rhythm of his son's breathing. He turned off the porch light and stepped outside again. The stars were bright, clearer than he remembered. Maybe they'd always been there, he thought, hidden behind the noise of control and fear. Now they shone freely over Pinebrook, unfiltered and untamed. In the months that followed, Ethan became something of a quiet leader, not by title but by trust. Neighbors came to him for advice, not permission. Together, they transformed Pinebrook into something new. The lawns weren't all perfectly even anymore, but there were gardens, birdhouses, and laughter spilling from open windows. People began waving again, borrowing sugar, sharing tools. The community that had once been divided by bylaws had finally learned the meaning of the word neighbor. One evening, as summer returned and the air filled with fireflies, Ethan sat with Maria and Jack on the porch. Jack was sketching in a notebook, a picture of their house with a new mural in the background. "You gonna be an artist now?" Ethan asked. Jack smiled shyly. "Maybe. Or a lawyer. Somebody's gotta keep people like her in check." Ethan laughed, ruffling his son's hair. "Whatever you become, just promise me one thing. Never let anyone make you afraid of your own home again." Jack nodded, eyes serious in the fading light. "Never." As night deepened, Ethan leaned back in his chair, letting the silence settle around them. The distant sound of children playing, the smell of barbecue from a neighbor's yard, the rustle of trees, all the small, ordinary things that had once felt impossible. The scars of the past hadn't vanished, but they no longer ruled them. The power that once enforced fear had dissolved into dust and daisies. Pinebrook was no longer a managed community, it was a living one. And as the wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint laughter of a boy who had found peace again, Ethan realized something simple yet profound. Justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about restoration. About letting light back into places that had forgotten what it looked like. Pinebrook's nights would never be silent again. They would hum with life, laughter, and the sound of people who had finally learned that freedom, real freedom, doesn't come from control. It grows from courage.